Hello and welcome to this week's Citrus Research Exchange. I want to welcome all of you who are here with us in person as well as those who are watching this lecture online. My name is Eugene No. I'm on the management team of the Citrus Foundry, which is a startup accelerator for transformative technology companies with the potential for disproportionate impact in society. And I have the pleasure here of welcoming our speaker. But before I jump into that, I have a few announcements that I want to make. Note that if you come here for a lecture next week, you will be alone. Due to the short week and the Thanksgiving holiday, there will be no lecture next week. So please keep that in mind. Next, today is the deadline for pre-proposal submissions for the Big Ideas program that's run out of the Blum Center, but is a multi-campus program. You can find out more information at their website, bigideas.berkeley.edu. Last but not least, there is a special event that's associated with the Citrus Foundry going on tonight. We have our twice a year, our biannual demo day. And so today at 6 o'clock tonight in this very room, we'll be showcasing our graduating class, the cohort from the fall 2015 year. They've just completed their 12-month acceleration program, and so they'll be presenting the progress that they've made, and we'll be meeting together to celebrate the accomplishments they've made together. So feel free to join us for the presentations as well as for the reception afterwards. I also want to note that one of the companies that will be presenting, Fruitbot, is a UC Merced founded company. So this is truly a multi-campus program. In our new cohort that we just onboarded, there's one company from UC Merced as well as two from Davis. So please keep those applications and great companies coming in from all our Citrus campuses. Now for our speaker. Jes Broeng, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Jes Broeng is a professor at the Technical University of Denmark, DTU, and a serial high-tech entrepreneur. He's a pioneer in the field of photonic crystal fibers and a co-founder of Crystal Fibre, one of the region's most successful photonic startups, which was sold in 2008. In 2012, he joined DTU to implement modern strategies to innovation in research labs and to tech transfer. He has been instrumental in spinning out seven companies from the Photonics Engineering department in the last 4 years. So it's become quite a prolific program there. And currently he's a visiting scholar at Citrus, and he also functions as an ambassador of sorts. Managing a lot of relationships and partnerships, building strong ties between Citrus and Danish universities. There was a group of members of parliament who were here not long ago, as well as startups. So in my work with Jes over the last few months, it's been remarkable the kind of impact he's had, both in Denmark as well as here, in such a short time. And I'm looking forward to hearing more deeply. I've heard this story several times, but I'm looking forward to hearing the full version of the entrepreneurship programs that he's running at the DTU. So please join me in welcoming Jes Broeng today.
Well, thank you very much, Eugene. It's a pleasure to work with you and the colleagues here, and happy to see so many of you here today. So the title of my talk is Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Photonics for Healthcare. I will talk mostly about entrepreneurship. That's where I have my strongest root. But our university continuously is looking at healthcare, so I'll introduce some examples of that one. I have this subtitle, Opening the Universities to External Entrepreneurs, because at least in my part of the world, that's one of the big barriers. We've been very siloed at the universities, and being here at Berkeley and the whole Bay Area, seeing how you have external people helping you with the research, it's really rewarding. It's something I've experimented with at DTU, and I'll show you results from that. But just to kickstart this, I'm a researcher. I still have a big passion for technology, and what I show here is still exciting to me. It's a highlight from my PhD work, where we showed for the first time a new physical mechanism experimentally. What you see in the picture is actually the cross-section of an optical fiber. So it's a piece of glass that's around the size of a hair. You see the cross-section, and all the rounds you see is actually holes in this one. So we have hundreds of holes going down this fiber. And what we were able to do for the first time is to trap photons by a new physical mechanism called the photonic bandgap effect. And that was really basic research. It was the start of I did as a company. I'll tell the story about that one. So what I'll just give you an outline here. Probably not all of you know photonics, so I'll give you an introduction to photonics, tell the story of how we started up this high-tech company out of the universities, and then move on to some of the challenges that many universities see in bringing technology out to the benefit of society. So I have some models on that one, which ties quite well into the Sudarja Center and the Citrus Foundry also. Student entrepreneurship has been an eye-opener to me to see how important it is to include students in what we're doing in the deep science, but also, you say, the very advanced business, and students play a role there. And the overall theme is really transferring knowledge and working with society. And that is it is a key just to show you and start historically on DTU. We are a university that's around 200 years old. The founder of our technical university is Hans Christian Ørsted. He is the person who discovered electromagnetism, and he worked out of the Copenhagen University, which is even a few centuries older than DTU, and he saw this lack of working with business people. And actually what I have here is a quote from when the university was founded almost 200 years ago, saying that it's really in the mutual benefit for business people and scientists to work together. And the quote, I think, could, if you saw it, could probably be taken from a university leader today. But this is around 200 years old, and it's really still strongly at the Technical University of Denmark. So jumping to photonics, photonics is actually a huge enabling technology. The European Union works with 6 key enabling technologies, where photonics is one of them. It has a global market of around 300 billion US dollars. 10% of the workforce in Europe is relying on photonics technologies. And what you see in the picture here, it's a look inside one of Google's data center. There's a lot of photonics in that. There's lasers to transmit signals, and there's optical fibers to transmit them. Photonics also covers the signal processing. So what you see in the top right corner is just a bit pattern of a signal. And of course, we all know that's the foundation of our internet as we know it. And I can just highlight that's really a stronghold at my department. We hold the world record of data transmission if you look over a single fiber. Some really remarkable work that's quite deep science, nonlinear optics, going into that field to make that faster transmissions. Another field which receives a lot of attention now is lightning. So the Nobel Prize were given a few years back to a group working with blue diodes, and that's sort of changing the whole energy scheme for the lightning industry. What you see in the background is actually a product of one of our spin-outs that do the most compact, visible high-power laser. And that's actually interesting also for this lightning system, because if we're looking for the most efficient light sources, we're actually moving beyond LEDs, if we have to have something really compact, and into lasers, where you use a highly efficient laser and transferring that energy into white light by phosphorus films. And some of the car industry is just starting to look into that, as you see in the lower picture here. Another area that's strong in our domain is light tools for life science. We don't work with neurophotonics directly, but we're providing sculptured light, as we call it, where you can actually very precisely illuminate neurons or grow synapses that are sensitive to specific wavelengths, and you want to have regions that are affected by light and then complete darkness outside that. So some of the most efficient and precise sculpture and light tools is made at our department. Another one which is a startup company, again life science related, more indirectly in this case here. It's lasers that are used for remote sensing. It's called a LiDAR. So it's comparable to radars, but you're using lasers to shine light into the atmosphere and receiving signals back. And there's a startup company now that is able to count insects and atmospheric fauna in the millions over tens of kilometers. So that's a technology that used to be traps for people going around with nets, going into to microscope and measuring whatever insects was there. Now they can simply, from the frequency of the wing beats and the signal also on the coloring of the mosquitoes, determine which kind of insects or vectors there are. So very exciting company, lots of interest on digital farming, interest now also to look at malaria control, for example. If you can do warning system, we can even, we believe now, look at if a mosquito has taken in blood or has not. One more example, which is directly related to my spin-out story, and that's in biomedical imaging. It's a huge field to use lasers, light sources to look into tissue in microscopes. And what you have in the lower here is a light source that came out of the spin-out company I was part of. And what you see here is the world's highest resolution microscope done by Leica Systems. I'll tell you more about that story. So this is jumping to my own startup. It came out of research in optical fibers. So optical fibers have been known for decades. It's quite simply a piece of glass with a thicker glass core, and light is sort of trapped on the inside if it runs at a grazing angle along the fiber. So you would shine light into the core of the fiber, and that would then be funneled or guided through the fiber. What we were doing is investigating new types of fiber where we didn't rely on this total internal reflection, but we're using air holes that were sort of comparable to the the atoms you find in semiconductors. So where you have semiconductors naturally in a lattice that can create band gaps and handle the electrons, there's no natural material like that for photons. And that's been done research, theoretical research of around 10 years in this field, including a famous professor, Ablonovich here at Berkeley. And we were thinking maybe we could do it in optical fibers where we have this infinite longitudinal direction, and we wouldn't need the same high index contrast actually to create the effects. And I use this picture just to give some technical intuition. There's one phenomenon in nature which we are familiar with, which is actually the colors in butterfly wings. Those colors are not caused by dyes or absorption. It's actually by diffraction. So certain wavelengths are scattered. If you look into the tiny structures of the butterfly wing, by the exact dimensions and refractive indices of these scales here. So slightly smaller, larger scales mean slightly longer wavelengths towards the reddish, and so on towards the blue. So it's that type of thinking we thought maybe we could do a completely new type of optical waveguide. We did that through some heavy, what's called some physical models. So quite basic research in that one, established theories for these type of optical materials, and people that work with semiconductors are familiar with the with the band diagrams. And we were calculating the same and could tell from our computers that it might be feasible to make such a fiber. This was before we proved it, but we filed a patent in Denmark. This is some of the early results from my PhD. We submitted a paper to one of the prestigious journals in photonics, and I still remember the feeling when I had the reply back. And it was that one reviewer thought this was fantastic. This was really a breakthrough and something different in photonics. The other reviewer said, well, there must be something wrong with the computer models. This just can't be true. You can't make an optical fiber where the core of the fiber actually has a lower density than the cladding of the fiber. I mean, light would just be trapped. So that paper was rejected. Luckily, there was a group in England that were able to host me for half a year and had some basic equipment to start fabricating these fibers. So what we were able to do within a month was actually to demonstrate really short lengths of fiber, nowhere near what could be used for telecommunications. But over a few centimeters we could demonstrate this effect, and then we were able to go straight into science. So that was it was a good first publication as a PhD student. I haven't been able to get into science since then, so it was lots of publications, but it was starting at the top here. And what this could have been for me, of course, was a continuous academic career. And there has been a lot of academic work for me in this one here, but it's been in collaboration with other universities. Because my professor back home in Denmark, he had the idea of saying, why don't we try and start up a company, Jes? He had worked with the traditional optical fiber industry for a number of years and saying, this could actually be huge, even though it's really risky. Why don't we do a startup? So I jumped out to the startup. The professor stayed on board, and it turned out to be extremely rewarding for both of us. Because with the startup, we were able to attract funding to get the world's most sophisticated fiber facility. So we raised around $20 million US over 2 years. And that just gave, as I said, the best facility. We are still so early in maturing the technology, so a lot of need for the research groups. And my professor actually has made a fantastic career. He's ended up becoming the president now of the Technical University of Denmark. And he often say that that would not have happened unless he sort of taken that journey and got that, you could say, that vehicle or that muscle that the startup company was. I have one video. I spent a lot of time at the drawing towers, stacking glass tubes on a macroscopic scale, and then going into a furnace of around 2,000 degrees and pulling these tiny threads out, and even conserving holes, even up to 1,000 holes when you're down to these dimensions. It's still fascinating to me, but I can show you some of my former fantastic colleagues here pulling the fibers. And these fibers are around 100 microns, so that's around a hair size you see there. What we did within 2 years, develop fibers that were up to the kilometer length. We expanded the basic technology and did some very sophisticated fibers where we could trap light more or less entirely in a hollow core. So the thinking here was we have the ultimate transmission fiber. We can make vacuum in these fibers, so there's no way light can have lower losses than in these fibers. Latency can't be any smaller in these ones because we're in vacuum also. So everything looked really bright. Our investors were happy. Telecom was booming around 2001. And what happens there, as a lot of people know, was the market completely crashed. And what we had to realize there around 2001, 2002, that was either do we shut down the company or do we completely pivot and find new ways to fund, which was still a startup in the sense. We're around 2 years old. And in hindsight, it's actually, when you work with that basic research as we did, it's quite typical that either the market changes or there's some technology barriers that you hadn't foreseen. In our case, all these holes, they actually collapsed when we're trying to fuse the fibers together. So we're really struggling to make, you could say, a chain or a supply chain working with these fibers in it. And in fact, we never succeeded. The company's successful, I'll show you what, but not in telecom at all. So two important things there. The group in England, they spun out another company, and we were fiercely competing. What we did was actually open up our platform to other universities and researchers, saying, well, here's a new fiber tool. Fibers are used in many different areas apart from telecom, and we start to work with those. We had a strategy where we say, well, let's follow the money. So basically, visionaries, research professors, big corporations that could see an interest in this field, if they had funding to support us, we said, well, they probably know much better than ourselves if it's a good market, and if there's funding, that's sort of a way of proving it. So what we did over actually around 4 to 5 years, we're gathering a lot of market intelligence in very diverse fields. The UK-based company had investors that stick to the telecom plan, and they were fighting it out for a year and a half further until the investors backed up and we eventually bought that company. some fantastic people in England that also helped the further journey. One of the things is we were able to stack multiple fibers together, and we used that to work with astronomers. So astronomers have, it's a small business area, but they actually have some big budget for specific projects. And this is a picture taken from Australia, where we worked with a group to filter out very specific wavelengths, which we could do because you can make the finest filters in these optical fibers. So we could design filters in an array and overlap that with images you got from the telescope, and then get, you can say, insight further out. Our investors were still on board, and they thought that's fantastic. We can continue the company, and you can develop or mature the technology, but it's not a big market. There's around 20 telescopes around the world, and even though we had our best engineers flying into the middle of Australia and really bonded well and loved working with the astronomers, there was a big push to move into what would be a higher volume market. And one of the markets that still started out as research field was in high power lasers. So we worked with a research group out of German universities that had funding from the German car industry. Most cars today, probably all cars today, are welded or cut using high power lasers. Many of them are fiber laser based. So there's some basic research money channeled that way to mature this technology. And we did some, if there's any fiber people in the room, you would know that making a 70 micron core for what is a 1 micron wavelength, that's quite extreme, around 10 times bigger than traditional fibers. And it gave, you could say, back to the research angle, we had this research group at DTU that were just propelling their career, so several professors actually were involved with these research collaborations, winning prizes and getting lots of papers. And just to speed up and show you some of the areas where fibers are used today, some of them is dicing or cutting for solar cell, where you need very short pulses, very precise. It's for memory chips repairs, where you want to go in with high pulses, cut some wires and not damage the rest. And for life science, it's LASIK, so it's operations in the eye where you want to have really fine cutting inside the eye, but no heating at all. So you need extremely short pulses, and you actually need big cores to do that in order to generate much power in a short time. We eventually ended up becoming an OEM supplier, so an area which is, to be frank, quite boring if you want to, if you're a researcher, I am. So you end up becoming a factory where it's more or less maturing and getting rid of tiny mistakes or errors, and less where you go out exploring. So I found myself around 2008, 10-ish, saying, well, I don't want to be a manager in a bigger factory. I actually do like to take this new immature technology and work with different partners. And the company was sold around 2008. I stayed on in the new merged company in a technical director role for another 4 years, until my old professor at DTU said, yes, why don't you come back and help us and start up your own company and run with that? Because we need sort of that entrepreneurial, and there's a lot of potential in the photonics department. So I did that. Oh, sorry, I skipped one of the examples. I'll do it very briefly. Except the big cores, we can also do really short, small cores, and one pulse can become basically a sunshine within the fiber. So the most bright white light, that's used in the microscopes I showed before, where you want to be able to tailor exactly the wavelength you want to hit a dye or some tissue that then can fluoresce, and you can get a fantastic resolution. Just some show-off pictures showing some of the world's most advanced microscope pictures. And that's the one I've been before. I didn't mention, actually, again, to the science part, I didn't personally, but people in my team worked with Stefan Hell, who won the Nobel Prize in chemistry in 2014. So it's, yeah, I can't emphasize it enough that startup is definitely not stepping outside the exciting research world. The company is around 300 people today. Just bought another company in Southampton a few months ago. And what I learned throughout that process is, I mean, you need world-class research and development. I think everybody understands that where we're coming from. I didn't understand really the depth of how important sales and marketing is, that you really need to have world-class expertise in the sales and marketing, because you're not, if you're doing startups, you're not selling a finished product. you're going out to talk to visionaries. So it's really not the majority of your customers. This is a textbook example studying startups, showing that the majority of your customers here, they're actually quite conservative. They want to have something that's proven. They also want to make sure that you're a company that is there in 5 years if they start to take you into your food chain. So really they won't buy from you. What instead is like our astronomers or research groups, that's where you head in with your early technology if it's immature. That's not what you do if you're doing an app and have an idea and bring that out. So you say I represent a different school, which is more the research-based startups. I took this slide from the Center of Entrepreneurship and Technology at Sudarja Center. Iklak Sidhu, who's a fantastic person. And he has this simple graph, basically showing what you need to do is to make progress on 2 axes. One is the technology. We understand that as engineers and scientists. The other one is the social progress, getting the right team on board, making sure the team handles getting the stakeholders on board and running the business. And it doesn't really matter actually which ones runs the fastest, but you do need both in order to become successful. So important lessons here. I've taken another very simple one that I like to show to my students. I teach at the engineering school, and that is sales is not how you imagine sales, somebody knocking on your door, pushing his way in. If you do high-tech sales, there's research shows that actually introverts perform better than extroverts because you really need to listen, you need to dig deep and understand. Actually the CEO that we hired in my company was quite an extrovert, and he was the best salesman I've ever seen. That brings me then to this more general approach on how to do startups and work with the university. This is a famous graph showing that there is this famous valley of death from we have an idea or a research area. There's typically funding, even though we're struggling to get the funding we would like as researchers. At least there is funding in that regime. There's also investments as you've proven your idea and starting to get customers. Then you can go to the stock market eventually, or you can have venture capitals. In the early phase, there's business angels, but there's still really a gap when you have something that's proven in a hero experiment in a lab to move that forward. And I'm now operating directly in this space here. And one of the keys to understand, and looking at other people's research, is why do startups actually fail? Well, they fail not because of technology, but they fail because there's a lack of competences in the team within financing and management experience and what we call executive selling. So knowing a domain and being able to take immature technology into a domain that typically takes experience. Research, this is from Scott Shane, who's looked at hundreds of universities across the globe, and it's very trivial actually what comes out, what we need to do as universities to be better at spin out. What we need is to bring in prior startup experience, prior industry experience, and then it's actually very difficult to do product development, even though you showed one-off or a hero to mature that so it's a real product. So these very simple lessons come out of big research. Another way of looking at it is to see which universities are good at doing spin-outs, and there's a big difference. The best universities are not just slightly better, a little better, they're just extremely much better, like Berkeley, Stanford, MIT. And then there's some that are doing okay, and if we look at the parameters, you really need the excellence in research. So you saw my story, that came out of basic research. If you have that top research, you also have the edge in doing this long journey. You need a head start basically. So it's really important to have top research. You need industry interaction. Typically researchers work with established industry and have this domain insiders around them. And the big thing we're lacking in Denmark and most places is have an open ecosystem where entrepreneurs come in, become advisors or industry fellows, helps the others, and sometimes, which I've been experimenting, actually jumps directly to the teams and pull them out. The two last ones are money available, that matters, it's real. And the last one is actually the culture of the researchers. If you have researchers that are open to sharing their ideas and spreading them, it's actually successful. I was talking to Arkalich, who's one of the founders of iCorps. He has been studying successful startups also out of the SBI program, and he had a remarkable saying that those companies where the professor takes a C role or executive role, they actually perform worse, and they're worse at attracting funding than if it's the younger students and with some externals. So it kicks quite well into saying, well, universities have to be good at doing research. We just have to collaborate with those that can help spin it out. So I founded a new model in Denmark, and basically we have a lot of people around the community, and said, well, why don't we try and bring entrepreneurs directly into the research labs? Developed a program for that. Has 5 phases: research, which we do, and then matching these external people in quite actually an extended time to build the trust and relation between them, and working within the university, using the university labs for the first prototypes. If that's successful and they actually can make a feasibility contract with a real customer, then we spin out the company. That proved to be successful, and the numbers that Eugene said initially, we spun out around 7 companies from the Department of Photonics. I worked with the Photonics Department of Chemistry that were equally successful. So 2 very different departments, one doing devices, the other one doing more wet sciences, and it worked quite well. I'll skip one here. Remark to get people on the hook to get this in. I typically use advisory boards, people with domain insight or some competencies that would like to come back and think it's fun to work with the universities. There's a lot of people actually that enjoyed their university time and are sort of separated from that one, and bringing them in is really a joy for both parties. Good impact, I'll not go into that, but the big eye-opener, as I said before, for me was the students. Those cases where we had students on board, even though they were not business expert or research expert, those cases were just much better and much more dynamic, because there's so much hard work also in start work. What the experienced guys sometimes forgot how difficult it is actually that things are not or functioning around you. So having students that can learn from the elderly and also doing some of the boring work, including also some of the exciting work, that was a real success. Time is running. We're teaching now also in entrepreneurship. Basically what we're doing now is we're taking ideas and patents that are among our researchers in our patent tech transfer office. Most of it is just lying on the shelves and not being pushed forward. We're now taking that into coursework, including ideas from external companies, and then we set up teams typically with 3 mindsets in a team. One's, which I'm using terms I've learned over here, is the hacker, that guy that really, or girl that really wants to make the technology work and is focused on that. One is the hustler, getting sure that we actually get money on board one and can sell something that's immature. The other one, a hipster that can design things, make it look nice, make sure we get a community also talking about this, and with mentors on board. We're up now running actually at 25 cases late last semester, and we see these cases are quite successful. We have a success rate between 15 and 20% of the teams that take this patent that would otherwise not move, and actually doing startup companies. These pictures here is taken from an incubator which the university funded recently, which is actually governed by the students. So it's similar to Jacob's Hall, some of you know that, with 3D printers and the staff. But then the students saying, well, it's your place, you control this one here. We have a Venture Cup finals in Denmark also, where startup companies around Denmark are competing, and we typically with these cases end up in the finals. Here's one example of a startup. So it was a research group working on a laser, doing the world's smallest laser, the one you saw in black in introduction. The teacher of the course just told me the story a few days ago that this team here had the world's smallest laser, and when he asked them, what do you want to do with your continued research, and they said, well, I want to make it 20% smaller again. He said, have you thought about trying to put some effort into lifting this into a startup case, see if you can work across fields? We made a successful startup out of that course. It has around 10 employees now. It's working in the medical space, looking at photocoagulation for the eyes, and raising some good funding also from the European Union, working with the old research green. So again, starting to see that it's really beneficial for the researchers. Then what I'm doing over here at Berkeley, working with the Sudaja Center, sharing thoughts with Eugene also in the Foundry, and it's truly inspiring. I can just see that you've sort of institutionalized what we've been experimenting with, but the same mindset. And I really like this collider thinking where you teach students the mindship about startups and some of the basic skills, and then you bring in different competencies, people from the outside, colliding those, and then see what comes out of it. Startup companies, research projects, or going into entrepreneurship in existing companies. And one company I brought from Denmark, or startup I brought from Denmark, and working under the Collider frame with the Sudaja Center and the Jacobs, is where we're looking at infusion therapy. So a quick run through of that one. Infusion therapy is, or IV treatment, is where you basically get something into your blood. It's 90% of patients that are hospitalized that get that. And the IV bag is always held freely, but then mounted on a pole. You can see this one here. So one of the oldest instrument, if you can call that, in the clinic. But clearly also in practical, it immobilizes the patients. You have to carry this one around. It's bulky, heavy, even inhygienious. So what we work with in Denmark is two people working out of the medical innovation hub, saying, why don't we just do a mechanical device that empties this drip bag and put it on the patient? And been interviewing around 200 doctors and nurses in Denmark, saying, well, that's quite a great idea, because we also know that patients will become faster fresh if they are mobile. So the technology is really simple. It's actually just a box where you can put the IV bag in, and then very simple mechanical devices. So I thought this could be a great case actually to try the Collider project, working with the Jacobs Institute, and we're just seeing a fantastic interest in this case from students and people across. Yeah, here are some of the great people I'm working with. Joey from Jacobs, Eldon, who's a grad student here, and Hanel is actually operating as a private individual, coming in to advise some of the students. We're thinking this goes into patients at home. Cancer treatment is moving into the homes with some quite sophisticated pumps, so there's a big opportunity there. Third world country, this was from Brazil, 2012, where people had to come in several hours to have medication due to the dengue fever. It would be obvious to have this mobile, relatively cheap solution and bring that to people. For emergencies, where you can actually, instead of having one important rescue person holding an IV bag, which they do today, you can free his hands and go out and save more people. Defense situations also. And here are some of the level we are at now, thinking a lot into the designing this one and make it accessible. Yeah, just last one is just to tell you the story. The guy who invented it, he's a patient himself, and he was basically looking at children at hospitals, how their mothers or fathers were walking around with them, and saying, well, we have to do something better for that. So the last case I'll show you is again something we worked on with students. We have a research group that do sophisticated light, and work with neurologists in Denmark and around the world actually. One of the things is that our brain is quite heavily affected by the light, the daily light. We know the vision from the colors we see, but in fact the blue light acts with some receptors in our eyes that handles hormones that controls our circadian rhythm, but in fact also our mood. We think there might be reasons to believe we can affect dementia and push that. You can see that depending on light that's shined into the eyes, you can actually see that the short-term memory is triggered or non-triggered depending on the wavelength. So you can say some basic science in this field here. What we had is just a picture to show you that looking at blue actually makes you feel good. So we had the problem in the we need that. Yeah. So I come from the northern hemisphere also, and what we're realizing is people are, of course, very much indoors. due to the weather, we don't have much light, and as we go older, also our lenses actually turn yellow over the years, which is a perfect filter for the blue light, which creates all these positive effects for your mood. So we worked with a student team to develop a therapy lamp, which are known, but the students realized, well, these that are up on the ceiling, they don't really work, and the elderly don't like to sit with this one flashing in their eyes. So they developed a solution where they embed it in the window, which just resembles the way the sunshine comes into the room, and it's in the right attitude here. So quite simple, I would say, but combining student knowledge and that drive really pushed the case forward. And what I'm just ending with here is recent results around springtime. So the team won a prestigious award in Denmark, and one of the students, just a fantastic guy, and he said, well, if this matters for the brain and our well-being and circadian, how about athletes? I have contacts to the Olympic team in Denmark, so we started to working with the Danish Olympic swimming team and saying, we bring you from Denmark to Rio. There's a time difference there. It's quite important you get to sleep. You know that matters for performance. You also be really stressed because swimmers have different races and they need to calm down afterwards, otherwise they're not performing best. So we put up a schedule for them to sleep better. And then we also started experiment with their reaction times. And this is one of the swimmers where we showed that if we could shine blue light into her eyes, we had an effect up to around 15 minutes after, where we could lower her reaction time with around 10%. And if you're an Olympic swimmer, I mean, they literally don't cut their nails, so it's quite extreme what they go into. And as a scientist, I say we don't have any enough data to show this, but what happened here is actually this lady here, she looks sad, but she's actually extremely happy. This was the 50-meter freestyle. She was not one of the favorites, but she actually won the gold medal. So this is, and yeah, she's a wonderful person. I'm almost getting emotional seeing it again. But this is the first time a Dane, we're a very small country, won a gold medal since 1948. So I have to say can't take credit for that, but it's wonderful to have been able, at least with the students, to give them a good experience here. So I think I'll just end showing again our fantastic space working with the students. And I love this quote. This is the French writer of The Little Prince, seeing that we can't really predict where things are going when we're researchers, but we're certainly enabling the future, and our students is a key part of that. So thank you.
Well, we have time for just a few questions, and so if any of you have questions, please wait for the mic to come around for the sake of our audience. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was really inspiring. I have a question about the educational aspect. So you put together teams of students who actually take IP and try to turn it into a company.
Right.
How did that work? Is it successful? Any insights?
So it works once we have the researchers supporting it, because we typically take things that are research-based. So if the researchers say, well, we don't want to deal with the students, we actually don't take cases in the first place, but we saw that in the initial years. They're not able to run with it by themselves, so they need that support. And we typically also need somebody with industry experience, I call it domain knowledge, that can come in and support them also. So it's a teamwork where we have stakeholders around the students also.
And in terms of numbers, have you seen already students who are successful in taking that IP and turning it into a successful company?
Yeah, so we can track those over. It's actually run for 6 years now, and the success rate is between 15 to 20% of the teams do a startup.
Wonderful. Thanks.
I was really impressed with the gap presentation, the one. Can you go back and explain a little bit? It went too fast.
Yeah.
I wanted to see like how you are bridging that gap.
Yeah.
And if you can talk a little bit more on that, if you don't mind.
I
with the one previous, yeah.
Yeah, because let me see, this one here. Yeah, I think maybe an overall comment is that we're actually starting even earlier than you see a lot of accelerators, a lot of incubators where the idea is there. We're starting actually even earlier. My role, I chose when I came to university not to be at the tech transfer and taking cake spinning that up, but going back to my research colleagues. Because even for me, seeing their research, it takes sometimes 2 to 3 months to understand enough what they're doing and where it might be heading. So I wanted to have a model where we have more people with the research background that comes in and interact actually with the researchers. Because I think actually still a lot of researchers is lost, even though we're better at when it becomes an idea to pushing it out. So I wanted to take that early step. And I just handpicked around 5 people. Since we're research based, I could handpick a number of people that I knew very well, some of my friends. That was starting to get a little bit bored also. I can just say that the one you saw in the first picture is my very close friend, one of my first employees in my startup. And he had left for another job after we got bored. And I just knew that he was the right person for this spin out. And I brought him in as an advisor, and he had lots of good suggestions on who should be CEO of that startup. Yeah. But he was on the advice board, and eventually it grew on him. So after 6 months, when he and some others said, well, we put in some seed money to help these others, and you know, this opportunity is too good. I have to head it and make a big difference because it's really his domain. He did his PhD in that laser technology, and now he's become sort of a businessman afterwards. And now what I'm still struggling with is, can we scale this actually? So, yes. so that's really tricky to do. But the tool I found is that I've let those that have tried it out themselves, I let them handpick 2 to 3 others. Right. So, and we actually see now in Denmark, it's sort of flowing as what's called rings in the water, because it's so important. It's people that the researchers feel comfortable with to build that trust. If you're a researcher and haven't been in the industry, you typically think, I don't need it. Either it's annoying, I don't want to speak to business people, or I just don't know how to handle, or if they think it's fine, interesting, they say, I can do this myself, I don't need it. But when you start to have this open ecosystem, which was one of the key learnings, then the researchers are saying, well, these people are actually extremely valuable, and see what we can do together. So that takes time. So I typically in this model, I don't have an accelerated time frame for it. What I see is actually it's paving the way. So once you get into this phase here, then you will fit ideally to Foundry or others. But I'm starting to work already down here to basically create a community.
So as just a quick follow-up question, what are you hoping to accomplish? And if you can go to the previous slide, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
What are you hoping to accomplish? Yes.
This one here. Yeah, I can say my personal ambition was to make sure that Denmark had a photonics industry also in 20 years. I could just see that we were successful, our company. It's likely we get, and they might be bought by some international. And you could just see the researcher was not enabling, or they were not doing this mushrooming as they should. So some of the professors at my department were the same one as were there 20 years ago, my PhD. They're fantastic professors, but you certainly need to bring in a new ingredient so they don't get sort of just further down to the details and get more decibel numbers on their formulas. So personally, it was to make sure we had a photonics industry, and now I see we can just bring more value in general to universities.
All right, thank you so much, Jes. If you have any other questions, I believe he'll be available afterwards, but since it is 1 o'clock now, I want to dismiss you. Let's thank Jes once again for his presentation.
Thank you, Jim.